My name is Ghazi. I was 28 years old, a Saudi prince with unlimited wealth and power. On December 8th, 2019, something happened that defied all logic. I tried to burn God's word, and heaven itself responded with fury. What I witnessed that day changed everything. I was born into one of the most powerful royal families in Saudi Arabia. Picture this: a palace with marble floors that stretched like an ocean, crystal chandeliers hanging from ceilings 30 feet high, and over 200 servants attending to my every need. I had private jets at my disposal, cars worth more than most people's houses, and bank accounts with numbers so large they seemed fictional. Yet, despite all this wealth, my heart felt like a desert wasteland. My father, the king, ruled with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. He was a man who commanded respect through fear and tradition. Every morning, I would kneel before him in the throne room, receiving instructions on how to maintain our family's honor and religious purity. The weight of royal expectations pressed down on my shoulders like the Arabian sun at midday. I was expected to be the perfect Muslim prince, a shining example of our faith to the world. From the moment I could speak, religious teachers filled my mind with Islamic doctrine. I had 7 different scholars teaching me the Quran, Islamic law, and the history of our faith. They taught me that Islam was the final revelation, the only true path to Allah. Christianity, they said, was a corrupted Western religion that had twisted the original message. I absorbed these teachings like a sponge, believing every word with the passion of youth. Ask yourself this question: have you ever felt completely certain about something, only to discover later how wrong you were? That was me. I walked through life with absolute confidence in my beliefs and my position. I thought I was chosen by Allah to be royalty, that my wealth and power were divine blessings for my righteousness. The servants bowed when I entered a room. Foreign dignitaries sought my favor, and religious leaders praised my devotion. I believed I was untouchable. But beneath the golden exterior of my life, something was missing. Late at night, when the palace grew quiet and the last servant had retired, I would stand on my balcony overlooking the city lights and feel an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. I had everything the world could offer, yet I felt hollow inside. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, I often dreamed of running through endless corridors, searching for something I could never quite find. My relationship with my father was complicated. He loved me in his way, but his love came with conditions and expectations. I had to be the son who would carry on our family's legacy, the prince who would never bring shame to our name. Every decision I made was scrutinized, every friendship analyzed for political advantage. I lived in a golden cage, beautiful but confining. The palace staff walked on eggshells around me. They had seen what happened to servants who displeased members of the royal family. I wielded my power carelessly, demanding instant obedience and becoming furious when things didn't go exactly as planned. I thought this was normal, that this was how someone of my station should behave. The idea that I might be wrong about anything never crossed my mind. It was during Ramadan of 2019 that I first encountered something that would disturb my perfectly ordered world. A new staff member had joined our household, the daughter of a foreign diplomat who worked in our cultural affairs department. She was quiet, respectful, and performed her duties flawlessly. But there was something different about her that I couldn't identify. While everyone else seemed stressed and irritable during the fasting period, she maintained an inner peace that was almost supernatural. When other servants complained about their burdens or gossiped about palace politics, she remained silent, but somehow radiant. I found myself watching her from across rooms, trying to understand what made her so different. It bothered me because I couldn't categorize her or understand her source of strength. She never tried to draw attention to herself or seek special treatment because of her diplomatic connections. Instead, she served with a humility that seemed genuine, not performed. When I spoke to her directly, her responses were always respectful, but her eyes held something I had never seen before. It wasn't fear or admiration or even the calculated deference I was used to receiving. It was something that made me uncomfortable because I didn't recognize it. The way she carried herself suggested she had access to a peace that neither wealth nor power could provide. This frustrated me deeply because I had been taught that Islam provided everything a person needed for spiritual fulfillment. Yet, here was someone who clearly had something I lacked, and I couldn't understand where it came from or how to get it for myself. During those weeks, I began to question things I had never questioned before. Late at night in my chambers, I would find myself wondering why someone with so little could seem so content, while I, with everything, felt constantly restless. I dismissed these thoughts as temporary weakness, telling myself that my spiritual teachers would have answers if I just applied myself more diligently to my prayers and studies. But the questions persisted, growing stronger each day. I started to feel like I was living a performance rather than a life, playing the role of the perfect Muslim prince, while my soul remained empty and searching. The wealth, the power, the religious certainty that had once felt like armor now felt like chains binding me to a life that brought no real satisfaction. Little did I know that my ordered world was about to be shattered completely, and that the very foundations of everything I believed were about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. December 7th, 2019 started like any other day in the palace. I had completed my morning prayers and was reviewing diplomatic documents when I decided to make an unannounced inspection of the staff quarters. As a prince, I had the authority to enter any room in the palace without permission, and I occasionally exercised this privilege to ensure our employees were maintaining proper standards. The diplomat's daughter had been given a small but comfortable room in the East Wing, near the other foreign staff members. When I pushed open her door, expecting to find the usual modest furnishings and personal items, my eyes immediately locked onto something that made my blood run cold. There, sitting openly on her small wooden desk, was a black leather book that I recognized instantly as a Christian Bible. My entire body began to tremble with rage. How dare someone bring this book of lies into our sacred home? Our palace was a place of Islamic purity, a sanctuary where the true faith was honored and protected. The presence of this corrupted scripture felt like a personal violation, an attack on everything my family stood for. I picked up the book with shaking hands, feeling as though I was touching something poisonous. The Bible was well worn, with pages that had been turned countless times and margins filled with handwritten notes in English. This wasn't just a casual possession. This was clearly a book that had been studied and cherished. The thought that someone had been reading this false doctrine under our roof, possibly even praying to the Christian God in our palace, made me feel physically sick. I immediately summoned my religious teacher, the elderly scholar who had guided my Islamic education since childhood. When he arrived and saw the Bible in my hands, his face darkened with the same righteous anger I was feeling. He confirmed what I already knew. This book represented everything that was wrong with Western influence and corrupted Christianity. Prince Ghazi, he said in his gravelly voice, this is a test from Allah. He has placed this abomination in your path to see how you will defend the true faith. His words resonated with something deep inside me. I had always been taught that defending Islam was the highest calling of a believer. And here was my opportunity to prove my devotion. We discussed what should be done with the book. Simply throwing it away seemed insufficient. This was a moment that called for decisive action. My teacher suggested that burning it would be the most appropriate response, a symbolic act that would purify our home and send a clear message about our commitment to Islamic truth. The more I thought about it, the more perfect this solution seemed, but I wanted to do more than just burn the book privately. I wanted to create a statement, something that would serve as a powerful example to others about the fate of false scriptures. I decided to record the burning, to capture the moment when righteousness triumphed over deception. My father would be proud to see his son defending the faith so boldly. That evening, I began planning the perfect location for this symbolic act. The desert outside Riyadh seemed ideal, a place where the vast emptiness would frame the significance of what I was about to do. I gathered everything I would need: gasoline to ensure the fire burned completely, matches, and my personal video camera to document the event. As I made these preparations, I felt a growing sense of excitement and purpose. This wasn't just about destroying a book. This was about making a statement to Allah and to the world that Prince Ghazi would never allow false doctrine to pollute his domain. I imagined how pleased my father would be when I showed him the video, how my religious teachers would praise my decisive action. Look inside your own heart right now and ask yourself, have you ever been completely convinced you were doing the right thing, only to discover you were catastrophically wrong? That was my state of mind as December 7th turned into December 8th. I was absolutely certain that Allah would bless my actions, that I was acting as a righteous warrior for the true faith. I spent the evening in prayer, asking for Allah's blessing on what I planned to do. I recited verses from the Quran about defending Islam against corruption and falsehood. In my mind, I was preparing for a holy act, something that would demonstrate my unwavering commitment to my faith and my family's honor. Sleep came fitfully that night. I kept dreaming of fire and wind, of voices calling my name from great distances. At the time, I dismissed these dreams as excitement about the task ahead. Looking back now, I wonder if God was trying to warn me, trying to prepare my heart for what was about to happen. But I was too blinded by my own righteousness to recognize any voice other than my own desire for religious validation. I woke before dawn on December 8th with a sense of destiny. Today would be the day I proved myself as a defender of the faith. I performed my morning prayers with extra devotion, asking Allah to guide my actions and bless my efforts. The irony of praying for divine guidance before attempting to destroy God's word is not lost on me now, but at the time, I felt completely justified in my intentions. As I loaded my supplies into the car and prepared for the drive to the desert, I felt like a soldier preparing for battle. I had no idea that I was actually walking toward the most important moment of my life. A moment when everything I thought I knew would be turned completely upside down. The drive to the desert that morning felt like a pilgrimage of righteousness. I had chosen a remote location about 40 kilometers outside Riyadh, a place where the endless sand dunes stretched toward the horizon like a golden ocean. The weather was absolutely perfect for what I had planned. Not a single cloud marred the brilliant blue sky, and there wasn't even the slightest breeze to disturb the flames I was about to create. As I pulled my Range Rover to a stop on the hard-packed sand, the silence was overwhelming. The desert has a particular kind of quiet that seems to swallow every sound, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the vastness of creation. I sat in the car for a moment, looking out at the pristine landscape, feeling like I was about to perform something sacred and significant. I had brought everything I needed for this ceremonial destruction. The Bible sat in a cloth bag on the passenger seat, along with a large container of gasoline, a box of wooden matches, and my high-definition video camera. I wanted every detail of this moment to be captured perfectly, from the initial flames to the final ashes that would blow away in the desert wind. Setting up the camera took several minutes. I positioned it on a small tripod, adjusting the angle to capture both me and the area where I planned to burn the book. The bright desert sun provided excellent lighting, and the vast emptiness behind me would create a dramatic backdrop for this act of religious purification. I tested the recording function twice to make sure everything was working properly. Next, I created what I thought of as an altar. Using several flat stones I found scattered across the desert floor, I built a small raised platform about 3 feet square. This wasn't just going to be a casual burning. I wanted it to have the weight and ceremony befitting such an important religious act. The stone platform would elevate the Bible off the sand and provide a solid base for the flames. When I removed the Bible from its cloth bag and placed it on my improvised altar, I felt a surge of righteous satisfaction. Here was the book that had dared to corrupt my household, now about to receive the judgment it deserved. The black leather cover gleamed in the bright sunlight, and for a moment I could see why someone might find it attractive. But I knew that external beauty often concealed internal corruption. I began the ceremony by speaking Islamic prayers and recitations over the book. Standing with my arms raised toward the sky, I called upon Allah to witness my defense of the true faith. I recited verses about the finality of Islamic revelation and the dangers of following false prophets. My voice echoed across the empty desert, and I felt like a warrior preparing for a holy battle. The gasoline came next. I poured it generously over the Bible, watching as the clear liquid soaked into the pages and pooled around the leather binding. The smell was sharp and chemical in the clean desert air, but to me, it was the scent of purification. I wanted to ensure that every page would burn completely, leaving nothing behind but ash and memory. With the camera recording and my prayers complete, I struck the first match. The small flame danced in my fingers, and I felt a moment of profound anticipation. This was it. This was the moment when righteousness would triumph over deception, when the false word would be consumed by the fire of truth. I touched the match to the gasoline-soaked Bible with complete confidence. But the strangest thing happened. The match went out. I struck another match, thinking perhaps the first one had been defective. But as I brought it close to the Bible, this match also flickered and died, despite there being no wind at all. The desert air was completely still, yet somehow the flames couldn't take hold. A small knot of confusion began to form in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Technical difficulties weren't going to stop me from completing this important task. I tried a third match, then a fourth. Each time, the flame would approach the gasoline-soaked book and then mysteriously extinguish. By the fifth attempt, I was beginning to feel frustrated and slightly unsettled. This made no sense. Gasoline was supposed to ignite easily, especially in the dry desert heat. Yet somehow, every flame I brought near the Bible simply died. Look inside your own heart right now and remember a time when you absolutely knew something should work, but it mysteriously didn't. That growing sense of confusion and frustration was exactly what I was experiencing. I began to pour more gasoline on the book, thinking perhaps I hadn't used enough. The liquid pooled around the base of my stone altar, creating what should have been an extremely flammable situation. But still, the matches wouldn't light the Bible. As I struck match after match, becoming more agitated with each failure, I began to notice other strange things happening around me. The temperature, which had been perfectly warm and pleasant, began to drop noticeably. The bright sunshine seemed to dim slightly. Though there were still no clouds visible anywhere in the sky, most unsettling of all, I had the growing sensation that I was being watched. I spun around, scanning the empty desert in all directions, but there was nothing to see except sand and rock extending to the horizon. Yet the feeling of being observed grew stronger with each passing moment. It was as if invisible eyes were focused intently on my every move, judging my actions with a weight that made my hands tremble. The absolute stillness of the air began to feel unnatural. Not even the smallest breath of wind disturbed the sand or moved my clothes. Yet somehow the atmosphere felt charged with an energy I couldn't identify. It reminded me of the tense moments before a thunderstorm, when the air becomes heavy and electric with approaching power. By the 15th or 16th match, I was no longer feeling confident or righteous. Something was wrong here, something that defied natural explanation. But my pride refused to let me admit defeat. I had come here to burn this book, and burn it I would, no matter what mysterious forces seemed to be working against me. I had no idea that I was about to witness the power of heaven itself. What happened next defied every law of nature I had ever known. As I stood there, frustrated with my 20th failed match, I noticed something on the horizon that made my blood freeze. A wall of sand was rising from the desert floor, stretching across the entire width of my vision like a massive brown tsunami. But this was impossible. The sky had been perfectly clear just moments before, without even a hint of wind. The wall grew taller and darker as it approached, reaching heights that seemed to touch the very heavens. I had lived in Saudi Arabia my entire life and had witnessed many sandstorms, but nothing like this. Natural sandstorms build gradually over hours with warning signs and increasing winds. This appeared from absolutely nothing and moved with supernatural speed. Within seconds, the temperature plummeted from pleasant warmth to bone-chilling cold. The brilliant sunshine disappeared as if someone had turned off a switch, plunging the desert into an otherworldly twilight. The wall of sand was now close enough that I could hear it roaring like a freight train, mixed with the sound of 1,000 waterfalls. My camera was still recording, capturing what I now realized was the moment heaven itself decided to intervene. I tried to run back to my car, but the sandstorm hit me before I could take more than a few steps. The impact knocked me to the ground with a force that felt deliberate and controlled. This wasn't random weather, this was directed power. Sand particles struck my face and hands like tiny bullets. Yet somehow I wasn't being torn apart as I should have been by such violent winds. The noise was beyond description. Imagine standing inside a jet engine while it roars to life, then multiply that sound by 1,000. But cutting through all that chaos, I heard something that stopped my heart cold. Someone was calling my name, not shouting over the wind, but speaking clearly and calmly as if we were having a conversation in a quiet room. Ghazi. The voice spoke my name with such authority and familiarity that I knew immediately this was no human being. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, penetrating through the howling wind directly into my mind and soul. It was a voice that carried the weight of eternity, speaking in perfect Arabic but with an accent I had never heard before. As I struggled to breathe in the swirling chaos, trying to protect my eyes from the stinging sand, a light began to penetrate the darkness around me. Not the harsh glare of the desert sun, but a warm, golden radiance that seemed to come from within the storm itself. The light grew brighter and more focused until it formed the unmistakable shape of a man standing directly in front of me. What I saw next changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The figure was tall and strong, with dark hair and kind eyes that held depths of love and sorrow I had never imagined possible. But what made my breath catch in my throat were the scars. His hands, visible through the supernatural light, bore the unmistakable marks of nails driven through flesh. His feet, partially visible beneath the flowing robes, showed the same wounds. This was Jesus. The man my religious teachers had told me was just a prophet, if he had existed at all. The figure Christians claimed was God incarnate, whom I had been taught to reject as blasphemy. Yet here, he stood before me in the midst of a supernatural storm, as real and solid as the stone altar behind me. Look inside your own heart right now and try to imagine the shock of discovering that everything you believed was wrong. Not slightly incorrect or needing adjustment, but fundamentally, completely wrong. That earth-shattering realization hit me like a physical blow as I stared into the face of the Son of God. His voice, when he spoke again, carried both infinite gentleness and absolute authority. My child, why do you fight against love? The words weren't accusatory or angry. Instead, they were filled with a sadness so profound, it broke my heart. He wasn't asking because he didn't know. He was asking to help me understand. As he spoke, images began flooding my mind with clarity that made my own memories seem foggy by comparison. I saw my life from his perspective, every moment of pride and arrogance, every act of cruelty toward servants, every time I had used my position to hurt rather than help others. But instead of the condemnation I expected, I felt his overwhelming love for me despite all my failures. I saw the cross, not as a historical event from 2,000 years ago, but as a present reality happening for me personally. I watched as this perfect, sinless man took upon himself every wrong thing I had ever done or ever would do. The pain in his eyes as the nails were driven through his hands wasn't just physical, it was the spiritual agony of absorbing all human sin, including mine. The understanding that flooded my heart was beyond intellectual knowledge. This wasn't someone teaching me theology. This was truth being written directly onto my soul. Jesus had died for me specifically, for Prince Ghazi who tried to burn his word. He had taken my punishment so that I could be forgiven and adopted as God's child. But the most shocking realization was yet to come. As the vision of the cross faded, I became aware of my surroundings again. The sandstorm was still raging with incredible violence all around me, yet I was sitting in a pocket of perfect calm. And there, untouched by even a single grain of sand, sat the Bible on its stone altar. The gasoline had somehow disappeared. The pages were completely clean and dry, and the book looked as pristine as if it had just been printed. The same supernatural power that had created this storm was protecting both me and the word I had tried to destroy. In that moment, I understood that I hadn't been fighting against a book or even a religion. I had been fighting against the God who loved me enough to die for me. The storm began to subside as gradually as it had appeared suddenly. The walls of sand settled back to the desert floor. The roaring winds faded to whispers, and the brilliant sunshine returned. Within minutes, the desert was as peaceful and still as it had been when I first arrived, but I was no longer the same man who had driven here that morning. When the last whisper of wind faded away and the desert returned to its supernatural calm, I found myself sitting in the sand, staring at the untouched Bible with tears streaming down my face. My camera equipment lay buried somewhere beneath tons of sand that had appeared and disappeared like a divine magic trick. But the book I had tried to destroy sat perfectly pristine on its stone altar, as if nothing had happened at all. My hands shook as I reached for the Bible. The leather cover was warm to the touch, not from the desert sun, but from something deeper, something that seemed to pulse with life itself. When I opened it, the pages were completely clean and dry, despite having been soaked with gasoline just minutes before. The handwritten notes in the margins, which I had noticed earlier, now seemed to glow with significance I couldn't yet understand. The drive back to the palace passed in a blur of confusion and wonder. My mind kept replaying what I had witnessed, trying to process the impossible reality that Jesus Christ, the Son of the Christian God, had appeared to me personally. Everything I had been taught about Christianity being a corrupted religion crumbled in the face of what I had experienced. The man I had seen wasn't a false prophet or a misguided teacher. He was exactly who Christians claimed he was. I hid the Bible in the most secure place I could think of, a small storage room behind my personal library, where even the servants rarely went. But hiding the book was easier than hiding the transformation that had begun in my heart. I felt different in ways I couldn't explain, as if someone had turned on a light in a room that had been dark my entire life. That first night, after completing my usual Islamic prayers out of habit and family obligation, I found myself drawn back to the storage room. I sat on the floor with the Bible in my lap, opening it randomly to see what I would find. The page fell open to John chapter 3, verse 16, and I read words that made my heart race. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. This wasn't the distant, demanding deity I had been taught to fear in Islam. This was a God who loved so deeply that he sacrificed himself for people like me. I found myself speaking to Jesus hesitantly, unsure if he would listen or respond. I don't know how to pray to you, I whispered in the darkness. I don't know your customs or your rituals, but I know what I saw today, and I know you're real. The presence I felt in response was immediate and overwhelming. It was the same warmth and peace I had experienced in the eye of the supernatural storm. But now it filled my heart instead of protecting me from sand and wind. I began to cry again, not from fear or sadness, but from a joy so pure and complete that I had never imagined such a feeling could exist. Over the following days and weeks, I began studying the Bible in secret, reading voraciously whenever I could find time alone. Every page seemed to speak directly to my situation, answering questions I had carried my whole life without even realizing I was searching for answers. The emptiness that had plagued me despite all of my wealth and privilege was finally being filled with something real and lasting. But keeping this transformation hidden from my family and the palace staff proved more challenging than I had anticipated. The change in my behavior was too dramatic to completely conceal. I found myself treating servants with kindness and respect instead of demanding compliance through fear. I lost interest in the lavish parties and entertainment that had once been central to my social life. Most tellingly, I began to experience a peace and contentment that made the restless urgency of my former life seem like a distant memory. My father was the first to notice something different about me. During our regular morning meetings, he would study my face with the shrewd intelligence that had made him such an effective ruler. "You seem different, my son," he said one morning in early January. "More settled somehow. Have you been spending extra time in prayer and meditation?" I answered truthfully that I had been praying more, though I carefully avoided mentioning to whom those prayers were directed. The irony of becoming a better person through embracing the faith my family considered heretical wasn't lost on me, but I wasn't ready for the confrontation that honesty would bring. My secret prayer life became the center of my existence. I would wake before dawn not for Islamic prayers, but to spend time reading the Bible and talking with Jesus. These conversations felt as real and immediate as speaking with another person in the room. I would share my struggles with understanding Christian doctrine, my fears about what my family would do if they discovered my conversion, and my growing desire to live according to Jesus' teachings. So I'm asking you, just as someone who found truth would, what price would you pay for real peace? Because I was about to discover that following Jesus would cost me everything I had ever known, but give me everything I had ever truly needed. The diplomat's daughter, whose Bible had started this entire journey, began to notice changes in how I interacted with the staff. She never said anything directly, but I would catch her watching me with a thoughtful expression when I helped carry something instead of ordering a servant to do it, or when I apologized for interrupting someone's work, instead of demanding immediate attention. One afternoon in late January, she approached me carefully in one of the hallways. "Prince Ghazi," she said quietly, "you seem to have found something that brings you peace. I have been praying for you since my Bible went missing." The knowing look in her eyes told me she understood exactly what had happened, though she was too wise to speak openly about it in the palace. That conversation filled me with both comfort and terror. Comfort because I finally had someone who might understand what I was experiencing. Terror because if she could see the change in me, how long would it be before others noticed as well? I was about to find out that my secret was much less secret than I had hoped. The discovery came on a Thursday morning in February when my father decided to conduct one of his unannounced security inspections. These were routine checks he performed throughout the palace to ensure no one was engaging in activities that could compromise our family's reputation or safety. I was attending a diplomatic meeting in the capital when his security team swept through my private quarters with their typical thoroughness. They found the Bible in my storage room within minutes. When I returned that evening, my father was waiting for me in his private study, the room where he conducted the most serious family business. The Bible sat on his massive oak desk, like evidence in a criminal trial. His face was a mask of controlled fury that I had seen only a handful of times in my life, usually directed at enemies of our kingdom rather than his own son. "Explain this," he said without preamble, gesturing toward the book with disgust, evident in his voice. "Explain to me how this corruption came to be hidden in my son's chambers like some shameful secret." The moment I had dreaded for months had finally arrived. I could have lied and claimed I was studying it to better understand our enemies. I could have said I was planning to write a refutation of Christian theology. I could have blamed the diplomat's daughter and thrown her to his wrath instead of facing it myself. But the peace that Jesus had given me held firm, and I found the courage to speak the truth. "Father," I said quietly, "I have given my life to Jesus Christ. I believe he is the Son of God who died for my sins and rose again to give me eternal life." The silence that followed my confession was more terrifying than any storm. My father's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to disbelief to a rage so pure it seemed to radiate heat. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deadly. "You have betrayed everything our family stands for. You have dishonored our name, our faith, and our ancestors who died defending Islam. You are no longer my son." The words hit me like physical blows. But somehow, the peace of Christ sustained me even in that moment. I had known this confrontation was inevitable, and I had made my choice. I couldn't betray the one who had saved me from that supernatural sandstorm, who had shown me love beyond anything I had ever experienced. What followed was the most difficult period of my life. My father gave me an ultimatum: publicly renounce Jesus Christ and return to Islam, or face permanent exile from the family and the loss of all royal privileges. He granted me 3 days to make my decision, 3 days during which I was confined to my chambers under guard. During those 3 days, I experienced spiritual warfare unlike anything I could have imagined. Every argument my religious teachers had ever made against Christianity seemed to assault my mind with renewed force. Doubts crept in like poisonous snakes, whispering that I had been deceived, that the sandstorm had been a hallucination brought on by desert heat and religious extremism. But every time the doubts threatened to overwhelm me, I would remember the scars on Jesus' hands and the love in his eyes. I would recall the supernatural peace I had experienced in the eye of that storm and the ongoing transformation in my heart that no amount of imagination could have produced. The reality of my encounter with Christ was more solid and dependable than anything else in my life. On the third morning, I gave my father my final answer. I could not and would not deny Jesus Christ, no matter what it cost me. The consequences were swift and severe. My royal title was stripped away immediately. My bank accounts were frozen and then emptied. The palatial apartment that had been my home was locked and sealed. I was given 1 hour to pack a single suitcase before being escorted off the property by armed guards. The man who had driven to the desert as Prince Ghazi left the palace that day as simply Ghazi, a man with nowhere to go and no resources except his faith. But here's what my father couldn't take away from me: the supernatural provision that began immediately. As I stood outside the palace gates with my single suitcase, wondering where I would sleep that night, a car pulled up beside me. The diplomat's daughter, who had somehow learned of my situation, offered me temporary shelter in a safe house she knew about. It turned out there was a small but growing community of secret Christians in Saudi Arabia. People who had found Jesus despite the enormous risks involved. They welcomed me with the love of Christ, sharing their meager resources and offering fellowship that was worth more than all the wealth I had lost. For the first time in my life, I experienced true family, bound not by blood or politics, but by shared faith in Jesus. The transition from pampered prince to persecuted believer was jarring in practical terms. I had to learn how to cook simple meals, how to wash my own clothes, how to budget money carefully when every real mattered. But spiritually, I had never felt more alive or more free. The golden cage of royal expectations had been unlocked, and I could finally live according to my conscience, rather than family obligations. God became my father when my earthly father rejected me. The prayers I had once offered out of religious duty became intimate conversations with the creator of the universe, who loved me unconditionally. The Bible I had tried to burn became my most treasured possession, a source of daily guidance and comfort that never failed to speak to my circumstances. Within months, I began sharing my testimony with other seekers, telling them about the supernatural sandstorm and the love of Christ that had transformed my heart. Despite the legal risks involved in evangelizing in Saudi Arabia, I felt compelled to tell others about the hope I had found. If God could save a prince who tried to burn his word, he could save anyone. What will it take for Jesus to get your attention? For me, it took a supernatural demonstration of his power and love that shattered every false belief I had clung to. That sandstorm taught me never to anger God, but more importantly, it revealed that God's love is greater than his anger. Every grain of sand in that storm was a grain of mercy, and every moment since has been a gift of grace I never deserved but freely received. I lost a kingdom on earth, but gained the kingdom of heaven, and that trade was the best decision I have ever made.